I shouldn't have been invited. That was my first thought when I pulled into the circular driveway of the Halloway estate. Same slate stone, same wrought iron gate, same creeping ivy, curling up the columns like it owned the place. It didn't not anymore. Tessa's voice greeted me before I stepped fully inside. Mara, you made it. God, you look so Portland. She kissed the air beside my cheek and reached for my coat, pausing just long enough to scan the lapels. My jacket was clean tailored but thrifted. She knew it. I knew she knew. The dining room hadn't changed since the year my father died. Same crystal chandeliers, same oversized silver cutlery that only gets pulled out when there's a press photographer around. None tonight, but old habits. Cousin Brad poured Pinot like he was hosting a tech summit. We just closed a Series B equity valuation in the mid-nine figures, he announced mostly to the ceiling. Tessa nodded along, lifting her glass. That vineyard in Tuscany I told you about. We're doing private dining now, by appointment only. Clients are flown in. Across the room, my mother smoothed her skirt and pretended not to look at me. I sat near the end of the table. My glass was filled with iced tea. Not because I don't drink, because I don't play. Brad leaned back, mock serious. So, Mara, tell us about your little apartment on Alder Street. Still renting? I smiled. I like the space. Tessa tilted her head. Didn't know people our age still rented, but I guess it works for some people. There was laughter. Dry, polite, well-rehearsed. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, because none of them would have landed in that room. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever thought to wonder, was that the Alder Street complex, that was my first acquisition, and this estate, the one they held these legacy dinners in like it was still theirs. I signed the lease renewal 6 weeks ago. The thing is, I wasn't always invisible here. There's a photo buried somewhere in the attic if they haven't thrown it out yet. I'm 9 years old, kneeling in the dirt with my father planting the rose bushes under the south window. We'd gotten matching work gloves at the hardware store. His were too tight. Mine kept slipping. We called that corner the quiet garden. He said it needed something gentle because the house had grown too proud. My father, James Halloway, believed in preservation, not performance. He taught me how to sand wood floors, how to read a mortgage, and how to listen without interrupting. He ran the Halloway estate the way someone might run a summer camp or a public library, orderly but kind. He died in May. Sudden cardiac arrest. I was 22, home from grad school for the weekend. By Christmas, the tone had shifted. My mother remarried a man named Conrad Langley, a banking executive with wine-colored socks and a daughter at Wharton. Conrad moved into the house, and slowly. So did the silence. We stopped having board meetings at the breakfast table. My room was turned into a Pilates studio. The rose bushes were torn out to make space for an herb wall. I remember sitting in the parlor with a folder in my lap, my thesis project, a modular housing initiative designed to protect long-term renters from predatory buyouts. I was proud of it. Still, I pitched it to the family foundation? Tessa laughed before I even finished the first sentence. That's cute, Mara, but scalable how? Brad muttered something about social equity being great for brochures. Mom didn't say anything. She just sipped her tea like she didn't hear me. That night, I folded the folder back into my bag and booked a one-way train to Portland. I didn't leave with bitterness. I left with blueprints. Stone Pine Holdings started with a duplex I bought under a friend's name, then a triplex, then a 12-unit on Alder Street with wood beams and 1940s plumbing. I learned to seal leaks, handle evictions, negotiate tax liens. I built slow, quiet. And I never used the name Halloway, not once, because legacy isn't what you're born into. It's what you build without applause. My first property was a 3-unit brick walk-up on Alder Street, tucked between a shuttered corner store and a Pentecostal church with hand-painted signs. The seller was desperate I was green, but I'd brought a pre-approved loan, a market analysis. I'd written myself and a blank check of nerves. I signed the deed under the name of Cascade Arc, LLC. I'd formed it the week prior, using a registered agent in Salem and a rented P.O. box. No one could trace it back to me. That was the point I moved into. Unit 2A. Refinished the cabinets with my own hands, learned to snake a drain pipe, ate beans for weeks while I covered the roof repair out of pocket, but every month the rent checks came in on time. Modest, consistent. I'd check the mail, tuck away the envelopes, and whisper, "Thank you." I didn't tell anyone. Not even Isla. Not yet. The next building came 2 years later, a 16-unit complex with vintage ironwork and asbestos problems. I had it cleared under Section 8 preservation zoning, got the tenants rehoused during the process, and brought them back when it was safe. Word spread slowly. Landlords who didn't raise rents, a firm that fixed instead of flipping. Tenants started sending friends my way. Single mothers, veterans, pensioners clinging to rent-controlled leases. I met Isla at a city council meeting about transit rezoning. She was taking notes for a local tenant group, her blouse stained with ink and stress. She didn't recognize me when she later applied to be my assistant. That was just as well. I hired her, gave her health insurance, and never once mentioned who I used to be. My portfolio grew. Cascade Arc branched into mixed-use buildings, storefront preservation energy retrofits. By 33, I was managing over 110,000 square feet across 5 cities. And all of it, every contract, every LLC, every holding company was carefully layered. I didn't want the Halloway name contaminating any of it. But I still kept a single item from the old estate, a yellowed landscape map hand-sketched by my father. It had been folded into the back of an old ledger I took with me the night I left. At the bottom in his blocky handwriting, "Let the house breathe, or it will forget how to shelter." That map sat on my wall above the desk where I drafted every acquisition proposal. By the time I made an offer on Halloway Plaza, the family estate, now technically under lien from mismanaged taxes, I already owned 70% of the block surrounding it. They didn't see it coming because people like them never look behind. The next family dinner felt colder even in June. Tessa had on a new pair of Louboutin heels and walked like the floor should thank her. Brad arrived late claiming a client call, but he reeked of vodka and sunscreen. I wore gray slacks and a blouse with no label. Isla had texted me that morning. "Contracts are signed. Holdings at 92% ownership. We're locked in." The estate wasn't just emotionally mine anymore. It was legally mine, and yet I still knocked before entering. Dinner was over. Salted lamb and undercooked risotto. Evelyn, my mother passed out place cards like we were at a benefit gala. She didn't say anything to me. She hadn't since 2015. Halfway through the meal, my Uncle Malcolm cleared his throat. He was head of the estate board now, a title with just enough power to be dangerous. "We've had some correspondence," he began, not looking at anyone in particular. "Stone Pine. Holdings has raised several questions about accounting inconsistencies. There's going to be a financial review." Forks froze mid-air. Stone Pine. Tessa blinked. "Who are they again?" "A private investment firm," Malcolm said tightly. "They've been purchasing legacy properties across the Northwest. We sold them a partial stake a few quarters ago. They've since increased their position," Brad scoffed. "Vultures. They're probably foreign. Want to turn the place into a museum or a condo farm." I sipped my iced tea. Malcolm continued. "They're requesting itemized records for the past 5 years. Renovation invoices, contract bids, foundation expenses." Tessa went pale beneath her spray tan. "That's absurd," she said. "The foundation's private. They bought the plaza." "Tessa?" His voice was harder now. "They own majority rights, including the right to audit." Brad slammed his napkin down. "We're not handing over our financials to some faceless." "They're not asking," Malcolm interrupted. "They're requiring." A silence settled over the table. Thick, pregnant. Across from me, Evelyn cut her lamb in perfect silence, her diamond bracelet tapping the plate. She still hadn't looked at me. "I told you to keep that roofing budget clean," Tessa hissed toward Brad. "I said no bundling." "And I told you not to run the plumbing through your husband's shell company," Brad shot back. "So it's my fault you billed us double for landscaping because I had to clean up your—" "Enough," Malcolm snapped. "This isn't about finger-pointing. This is about Stone Pine, seeing things we didn't disclose." My fork hovered over the plate. I watched them all. Not out of amusement, though. There was some. Not out of vengeance, out of confirmation. This was rot. Quiet. Rot. Moral laziness that wore pearls and carried legacy invitations. They'd made a kingdom out of inherited capital and thought silence meant safety. But silence in my world was where I planted seeds. The audit documents were already compiled. The legal notices were already filed. Tomorrow morning, they'd get an invitation one they couldn't ignore to a compliance review session with Stone Pine Holdings. They'd come thinking they could charm a faceless executive, and I would be sitting at the head of the table. The room was quiet when I walked in. They had already gathered Brad, Tessa, Evelyn, Malcolm, 2 estate attorneys, and a Stone Pine Holdings liaison they didn't know was mine. They were seated at the long mahogany table in the estate's old library. My father's library. The chandelier above them had been recently restored. Brass crystal imported wiring. I paid for it, quietly. 3 years ago, no one had asked where the funds came from. No one ever asked. I stepped through the doorway. The click of my heels against the hardwood made Brad look up, then Tessa, then Evelyn. No one said a word. "Sorry I'm late," I said evenly. Traffic on Alder was a nightmare. I set my briefcase down at the head of the table where my father used to sit, where Malcolm had assumed I wouldn't. Brad narrowed his eyes. "What are you doing here? I'm chairing this review," I said, unclipping the latches. Tessa laughed. "Excuse me." I opened the case and began laying out packets of documentation, sliding one in front of each person, like playing cards. "I'm Mara Halloway," I said calmly, managing partner and sole owner of Stone Pine Holdings. As of this quarter, I control 92% of this estate's equity and 100% of its redevelopment rights. Brad's jaw dropped. "That's not possible. I filed the acquisition through Cascade Arc Holdings. You remember Alder Street, don't you? You joked about me renting it. That was the first building I bought." "You lied." Evelyn finally spoke, her voice razor thin. "No," I said. "You just never asked." Malcolm lifted his packet, flipping pages, his face drained of color. "This can't be real." I turned to Tessa Page, 6. "The invoice your husband submitted for the East Wing plumbing retrofit, $282,000. Average market bid for that scope. $91,000. I've included comparable estimates." She paled. "You went through our contracts. I had a fiduciary duty." "Unlike you." Brad shoved his packet back toward me. "You little. This is a stunt." I didn't flinch. Page 9. Covers. The roofing repairs that allegedly required $2,003 million. According to the signed scope, they included materials not even used on this property. Evelyn stood. "You don't get to come back here and humiliate us." I looked at her for the first time. Directly. "You humiliated yourselves." She faltered. I continued, voice still calm. "You told everyone I was poor, that I rented, that I was irrelevant, but I've been the one underwriting your overdrafts for years, quietly without recognition, because I believed stupidly that protecting this estate meant something." Malcolm swallowed. "Why didn't you just tell us? Because telling you would have made it about ego." I said I wanted the work to speak. Tessa's voice cracked. "You want revenge? That's what this is." "No," I said. "If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be calling the IRS." The room went still. I reached into my folder and pulled out one final sheet, a ledger. This is a list of every anonymous transfer I've made to the Estate Foundation since 2014. Every invoice I've personally covered. Every debt I absorbed to keep this place solvent. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read. I looked at her. "You thought I left, but I was still here. Just not where you could see me." Malcolm cleared his throat, quiet. "What do you want?" "Mara," I considered, then answered. "Accountability, structural reform. No more shell contracts, no more nepotism, no more passing legacy off as immunity. This place will be rebuilt from inside out with ethics, transparency, and decency." "And if we say no?" Brad asked. I looked at him, then I released the audit. Silence. Tessa lowered her eyes. Malcolm exhaled. Evelyn sat down slowly. No one objected. I gathered the extra packets and placed them back in my briefcase. As I did, I looked up at the chandelier. "You once called me poor," I said softly. No one moved. I turned to the door. "I paid for that light above your head, and then I left the room." The official board statement was released the next morning. Stone Pine Holdings would assume stewardship of the Halloway estate under a new operating charter, independent audits, ethical contracting, and public reporting of all foundation activities. The existing board would be dissolved. No one contested it. The press picked it up by noon. Former Black Sheep restructures iconic Sonoma legacy. I didn't read the comments. Brad sent a terse email 2 days later. I withdraw from any future dealings. I expect my privacy to be respected. I didn't respond. Tessa resigned from her public nonprofit roles and pulled her husband's firm from several active projects. A week later, I heard they'd relocated to Austin. Evelyn didn't call. But 3 days after the release, I received a hand-delivered envelope with her handwriting, no note, just a check. The exact amount I had used to save the estate from foreclosure in 2018, I didn't cash it. Instead, I filed it in the Foundation archives under a tab labeled Symbolic Gestures Unclaimed. Malcolm called. He wanted to meet. I agreed. We sat on the same back patio my father used to read on now, repaired, repainted, and shaded with the same lemon tree I planted with him in 1997. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "You're more your father than I ever gave you credit for." I didn't respond right away. "Then that's the nicest insult I've heard all week." He smiled reluctantly. "You know, we thought you left because you were soft." Sensitive. "I am," I said. "I just stopped apologizing for it." He nodded. "You built something real without asking anyone for permission." I looked out at the estate's west wing. Quiet, dignified, no longer cloaked in illusion. He built something real, too. I'm just trying to keep it from collapsing. We sat in silence for a few moments, the kind that doesn't need filling. Before he left, he said, "You didn't have to come back." I nodded, but I did, because someone had to stay. That evening, I returned to my apartment on Alder Street, the one they all laughed at, the one I still lived in, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Outside my window, an older tenant was sweeping her steps, humming to herself. A teenager in a hoodie waved at me on his bike. The buildings here weren't grand, but they were clean, safe, steady like legacy should be. I changed into a t-shirt-made tee and opened my father's old ledger. Inside the back cover, I wrote a single line. Restoration begins in silence. A week later, I hosted a small gathering in the courtyard of Alder Street. Not a press event. No string quartet, just tenants, neighbors, kids with juice boxes, and one table of cookies. Isla baked herself. The light was soft golden. The kind of California evening that smells faintly of jasmine and pavement still warm from the day I stood near the garden bench, the one I'd restored last spring, using reclaimed cedar and an old sketch my father had drawn. His handwriting was still faintly penciled in under the seat. I hadn't sanded it off. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd lived in Unit 1B for 38 years, settled beside me. She wore a navy cardigan and carried her folding cane like a scepter. "Your little party's better than all those foundation galas," she said, smiling. "At least the cookies don't come with lectures," I laughed. "That's Isla's specialty. Cookies without speeches." She glanced around. "It's a good building, you know. Not just the bones, the way it feels, like it's meant for people, not just price tags." I nodded. That was the idea. Down the path, I saw Tessa's daughter 12 now icing a sugar cookie with a plastic knife sitting next to the boy from Unit 3C. I wondered if she knew who I was, if anyone had told her. Maybe not yet. Maybe never. That was fine. Malcolm arrived late. He didn't speak much, but he brought a lemon pie. Said it was a tradition. As the sun dipped lower, I stayed where I was standing in the middle of the space they once said was beneath me. The building was lit from within, not just bulbs and sconces, but warmth, noise, language, community. My phone buzzed. A new message from Isla Tenant. Renewal rates hit 94%. Local business leases extended. Press wants a follow-up. Ignore, I typed back. For now, then, I turned off my phone. This wasn't a story that needed broadcasting. It was enough that it happened, that it held, that it lasted.